So yeah, firstly, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everyone for joining today. Of course, the discussion will be how can companies practically use AI and deep learning in 2021. So first and foremost, if everyone could do a quick introduction of themselves. If Anders, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks, Charlotte. So I'm usually present myself as an old guy, an extreme tech nerd, but I've been working and doing research in AI for like 20 years and did a PhD in Linköping University for about 20 years ago. And actually continued in academia for some time, but then were basically lured into industry, but then got a taste for actually working with AI in industry is actually in many ways more rewarding than actually doing that in academia. So I've been doing that mainly for the last like 15 years and been in a number of companies like Spotify, where I worked for many years. And we had a research group that basically made use of big data and machine learning techniques to try to both understand and optimize different services at Spotify. I also then moved on to a company called Peltarion that got a lot of funding for trying to help other companies get started with the latest type of AI techniques. And also connected to, I think, one of the questions we'll be speaking about later, what the problem is that a lot of companies have in getting started with using especially the latest AI techniques. And one of those problems is the tooling and the level of maturity that is lacking today, and how we can try to help with that. But since the recent month, I've been moved into another very exciting area. So I'm now trying to help the Swedish Security Service in scaling up their data science and AI efforts. So very much looking forward to working more with that as well. I've also been part of starting the Swedish AI agenda work that we had, the AI Sweden and the European AI Alliance and other stuff. So a big tech nerd is basically what I am.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I love that. Love that introduction, and we'll definitely get to answer your questions later on, which is great. Matthias, if you could give a quick introduction to yourself as well, that would be lovely.
Yeah. So I, practically, I've also been working in the field of AI for a little more than 20 years as well. Although we didn't consider ourselves working with AI, I'm a computer linguist, and I've since I left university at the end of the 2000s, end of the 90s, I've been working with natural language processing, understanding, and also speech recognition ever since. So a few years back, all of a sudden, the guys like me who were in that field, we were kind of used to, not rendering too much of interest, apart from some tech nerds and some companies who, understood that you could actually use this for something. All of a sudden, we're in the middle of, one of the hottest technology trends for decades, right? So, but I'm super interested in all the latest technologies, especially maybe in my home field, where there have been some amazing strides over the past 3, 4, 5 years. So I work with the practical aspects of AI mostly, although we do some research and R&D obviously at Telia as well in our product unit, where I'm responsible for the AI and automation. But mostly we focus on the practical applications of AI technology in different types of solutions that our customers may want to have. And I would say, the common denominator in many of the applications we see today is natural language, and obviously also, vast amounts of unstructured data, which is language in a way. So I'm very psyched about what is going on right now, and I'm also very happy to see that we're approaching a stage where we are viewing AI not as something mythological almost. It's actually something that we can work with, and we can shave off a bit of the unrealistic hypes and expectations on the technology as well. So we're maturing a bit, I believe, in our way to view the practical implementations of AI. So yeah, you know, trying to and sorry, since I'm a linguist, I also think it's very important being in this part of the world, you know, the Nordics with very small languages. I think is important for everyone working in this field, especially if you're working in the area of computational linguistics and NLP, etc. To contribute to making this technology also available for our very small languages. Otherwise, we're going to be, you know, run over by English-speaking part of the world, or German, or Spanish-speaking, or Chinese-speaking part of the world. So I think that is important also to keep our position as a, you know, digital, you know, highly digitalized and sophisticated technical part of the world. So I think that is also, you know, soft part of our mission to contribute to that as well. Yeah. Enough of that.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. Alexander, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. And and my background is as a transformation professional. So I worked my whole professional career with company transformation, business transformation, in different roles. And I started out in management consulting, did larger transformation programs for customers, and then I ended up working for Ericsson for 7 years with strategy execution and digital transformation and automation and AI, predominantly working with 3 different CIOs quite closely. And I was one of the kind of pioneers starting automation and AI when that started to scale within Ericsson. That had been a research topic and something that had been done a lot for many years. But I think 2016, 2017, that really started to become mainstream and something that was heavily invested in. So I had the opportunity to lead and build the group that was driving this internally in Ericsson and growing that team from very small to, I think we were close to 500 people when I left, including partners and 80 data scientists. So we did lots and lots of automation and AI projects, and not because we thought that was, you know, fun from a technology perspective, but because we saw that was really generating a lot of business value and quite transformative in many parts of the company. And based on that, you know, a colleague of mine saw the opportunity to actually create a product that would solve some of the challenges that the companies were facing when scaling automation and AI. And that was the birth of Turbotic, which is my current company, which is a SaaS company providing enterprise software for managing automation and AI initiatives. So in my new role, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here. I'm helping our customers then to use this product to have better success with their automation and AI initiatives. That's my background.
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction. And last but not least, Patrick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, certainly. So hi, everyone. Patrick Couch. I guess I'm sort of the odd one out here. My background is I was pursuing an academic career in the humanities, in the fields of philosophy and literature. And I wrote my thesis, my master thesis, which led me on to the PhD program on, apologies. Yeah, so I was pursuing an academic career, and I was writing about the human-machine interaction and interfacing and boundary blurring and the impacts of interacting with technology on the way we think from a literary philosophical perspective, focusing on the sci-fi writings of William Gibson. And then there was a point in my career where I felt that I really needed a change of scene. I really needed a break. And this was at the end of the 90s. And a lot of my friends at business school, they were starting up .com companies to sort of capitalize on the possibilities of these new digital technologies that were coming. So I sort of ended up there, and I was spending years and years and years running around doing different things there. And then eventually IBM picked me up, and that sort of returned me to the fold, looking at artificial intelligence as a viable problem for businesses to tackle. And then all of a sudden, these things that I had been pursuing from a rather theoretical, philosophical perspective became very real and practically valid to discuss. And we can see this in all the discussions ongoing now with ethics and biases and the problems of scaling and the way, you know, social media is impacting social discourse, and then in a number of ways. And I just saw recently, you know, was it last year when Mark Zuckerberg started talking about metaverse, which is, you know, a lean on Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash novel. So we see these themes of, you know, fiction stipulates a vision, and then somebody will have the idea to try and realize it. And I think, like Matthias said, I think we are in a very interesting time and place now with technology and us humans using it. And I think it'll be a very interesting conversation today in this podcast to see what you guys think about some of these questions that interaction raises.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And I think we're giving everybody sort of background and expertise. I think that's exactly why I'm excited for this podcast and for the discussion to get kick-started, because it's definitely going to be an interesting one. So thank you again, Patrick, for your introduction. So I'll first and foremost start off with Anders' question. So Anders, you asked, what is the future of AI? Will the AI divide continue, or will AI start to democratize? So if you'd like to give a little bit of background behind your question, why you think it's important, that kind of thing, and then I'll open it up to the group to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think this concept of the AI divide is important. And I do think it's important that we understand what the current situation that we have in the world really is. And the way that I view it is that we can easily see that a few selected companies, we know the big American tech giants that we have, the Google, the Facebook, the Amazons, the Microsoft, etc. of the world, and also the Chinese companies, the Tencent, the Baidu, the Alibabas, etc. They know how to use data and AI, and they are the most valuable companies in the world today, without a doubt, in any kind of sector. But we can also see that most other companies that try to make use of data and AI, they usually fail. This is basically the AI divide. The problem, you know, this plays on the old digital divide that we saw before, but now refers rather to the problem that we have a few selected companies that can truly benefit and find the value in data and AI, and very many other companies fail. And I think it's important that we, for one, recognize that this is the situation that we see in the world today, and also try to understand more, you know, why this is and how we can try to fix it. So I think one way to try to just lay the land or set the context a bit here is to try to, for one, describe, you know, what is the potential if we use data and AI correctly. And secondly, we need to understand, you know, what is the problem? Why do we have this kind of AI divide today? Why have so many other companies problems with doing something that some companies can do very well? And then finally, you know, if we can find some potential solutions in trying to minimize this kind of AI divide. So please interrupt me, otherwise I can speak about this forever. But I can at least start to give some ideas or thoughts that I have. And I think the first one, you know, trying to understand the potential, I think no one here in this group or most people listening really needs to be, you know, to be described and try to understand what the potential is. Everyone knows that it is a great potential. And just in Sweden, we had a big report coming up last year from DIGG, a Swedish digitalization authority, that said basically that if we just in the Swedish public sector alone use data and AI properly, we have the potential to save 140 billion Swedish crown per year. And there was another report in 2018 from Vinnova, a Swedish innovation agency, that said if we make proper use of data and AI, we can basically double the economic growth that we have in Sweden. And the same, of course, for other countries as well. And of course, it's very easy to understand the potential if we just look at the big tech giants. You know, they have shown and proved that, you know, if we know how to do it, if you have the big research groups, if you have all the data, if you have the infrastructure in place and can build products and services that make use of this, it is a huge potential. we can also see from a more research point of view that it's been an amazing amount of advances from a research point of view. Now I'm not speaking about in like operational AI, but more like a research AI point of view, and we can see what OpenAI and DeepMind and the Chinese companies and other companies are doing with models like everyone's speaking about GPT-3 or Clip or DALL-E, or I think one of the most amazing ones that just recently came out is from Facebook called BlenderBot 2.0. That is, I think, much more amazing, but also much more scary. And just to give a bit of a background about that, so for one, this is a model that can understand text, but what it can also do, it can basically search the whole internet at the same time. So you can ask it a question, it can try to give an answer, but can also do background research in real time, trying to figure out, what should the answer for this specific question be, and then have a discussion about that. And this is a type of discussion that is extremely well working and intelligent. And this is amazing, that the value that this type of services can bring is amazing, but you can also think from another side, imagine if this type of service get in the hands of someone that abuse it. Imagine if some foreign country that wants to abuse it were to use it to kind of spread the propaganda of some kind of opinion, and suddenly you flood all the social medias and whatnot of comments that is, from a factual point of view, accurate, super hard to detect. It can have big effects. So although the positive, potential is amazing, it's, I think, important just as equally to also think about the potential abuses that these kind of very powerful techniques can have.
Definitely.
Sorry. Yeah, please. Otherwise, I speak too much all the time, but let me just speak a bit. That's the potential, and I hope you all agree. I mean, we can easily see the advances we have seen, and I think you all agree that the potential is huge if we use it correctly. But the problem we also have is the divide, and the problem is that some few companies have the big research group, all the knowledge, the infrastructure, the data, and they can build products in a very agile and quick and efficient way. And what, especially from the time in Peltorin, when we collaborate with so many other companies, and we really try to help them in the journey to become more data-driven and AI-ready. You hear the kind of question, or when you speak to them, you hear the kind of comments saying, "Yeah, we have the data, no problem. We want to really make the investment in AI. We do believe in that." But then when you start to dig a bit more deeper into what the situation is, they don't have the data. It's not organized. It's not ready to be used as training data for the specific use case they're interested in. And they don't have the infrastructure in place, and they don't have the mindset of how you should work with AI-driven products, which is different from software engineering, traditional software engineering. So all that kind of understanding and knowledge is lacking, and therefore they fail. And it's kind of obvious when you see it. And that's something that we need to try to fix. And it's also the famous concept of the prototype graveyard that I love that as a concept. And although I hate that is the situation that we have in the world, but we see a lot of companies basically doing POCs, proof of concepts, but they never get into production, and they end up in the so-called prototype graveyard. And this is a big problem that is causing the AI divide, and we need to fix. Perhaps I should stop there, but we could start to think about what the potential solutions could be. But before we can do that, I think it's super important to first understand what the potential is and what the problem is. And these were some of my initial thoughts about that, at least.
No, definitely. And Matthias, did you have something to add to that then? Sorry.
Well, of course. I mean, the potential is huge. Again, I think for those of us working in this field, I think still it's very important to be very concrete about what the potential is, what you can actually do, and what you cannot do today. But that is sort of a sidebar. But when it comes to the AI divide and the head start that these large companies have, it's I don't know if it was a conscious strategy from their part, or they just so happened to have all this data that they could do whatever they wanted with. And this is one of the differences between these companies and many other companies, such as a telco like Telia, right? We have plenty of data. We cannot use that data in the same way as Facebook or Google does. And we've given them our consent to do whatever they want with our data in a way. At least we used to. So I think they had all this data, and they then had that head start, and obviously they had the economic muscles to hire whoever they wanted to create these research teams, etc. But I think the key here is the data and the not just having data, but being able to actually use it. This is what differentiates these companies from many other organizations, I believe, in the world. And we're also in a time now where we're talking about regulating AI and regulating the technology, and the EU wants to take the leadership in sustainable or ethical AI, which is very, very good. But we may also, hamper ourselves in terms of research, because we're making it so difficult to do things, because we have all these all these regulations for good and for bad. I just want to make that very clear. I'm not against regulating. I'm not against at least to some point. But I think that is a key differentiator. And they have this head start. What I think though is very interesting is all of these open initiatives. Just to get those open initiatives used out there in the real world, in the industry, in organizations, public and private sector, that could be a countering of these major companies that have acquired this head start. But my reflections on that divide and why we're there.
Let me just comment quickly about that, because I think you made some really good points, especially about regulation, which is not the most fun topic to speak about, but very important one for sure. And just as you say as well, Matthias, of course we need to have a regulation, but we need to have the proper one. And the intentions of, for example, GDPR that were put in place a couple of years back were really good. But what really turned out to happen was that the big tech giants, the big companies that have legal resources to actually do comply with them, they have no problem at all to be compliant with that. And then they turned out that the other companies that do not have the big legal resources, they are suffering from it, and instead are not investing and having, daring to innovate in these fields. So it's actually increasing the AI divide significantly. And I think this is important, especially for the upcoming AI Act, to really think about the consequences before you put new regulation in place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. At that same time, I must say, I don't think prohibitive measures ever work. I'm one of those, legalize and regulate type of guys generally. And I think that is a much more viable way forward. But I must say, when it comes to this divide in the democracy, we tend to toss these words around. And I really think that there's a misconception here. I think it's obvious to me that there will be a divide, a continuous increase of the divide. I do not see, you can just compare it to, vaccine availability across the globe or something. We always see these divides where countries and companies with power or means or access to means will sort of frog leap or push ahead and foray into the future, and others will be left behind. And that if we're, socially aware or for some other reason we bring them with us, okay. But I don't think there's anything inherent in the technology that would lessen the divide in itself. When it comes to the democratizing part, I don't think there will be any democratizing of AI really, but there will be a ubiquitous presence of AI everywhere. So everybody will sort of be invited, willing or no, to make use of the technologies, or forced to use the technologies. But what I think is really telling when it comes to this specific topic is that we tend to, and when we talk about the powerhouses of AI, we tend to point to China and we tend to point to the US. And both of those countries and their cultures are very different, but they share this complete how should I put it? they're almost the victims of their own success in terms of their technology use. China is, of course, a totalitarian dictatorship, more or less, and the US is just becoming this balkanized postmodern nightmare where people don't trust anything because of the large availability of manipulative measures on the net. So I think what we need to really do is what I think the EU has been doing for some years now, just trying to tackle this from a non-tech angle and try to bring people up to par when it comes to how to think about the interaction with technology and what we need to make sure that we have at our disposal in terms of evaluating the potential consequences. I think there's a complete naivete rampant within and without the tech community, whether or not you are pro or against, the good or the bad outweighing the other. So I think really, maybe this is just me as a humanities type of guy to push for the reinstatement of the appreciation of humanities and other disciplines. But I do think it is important to stress the fact that technology impacts us in very many ways that we don't foresee the details of. So we need to sort of tread gently, I guess.
But as many have pointed out before this discussion, obviously, is that now we're facing a technological revolution, so to speak, and we're having this conversation before it has happened. While in the past we have faced the consequences of our technological advancements when it's too late. So this is if you want to take an optimistic view on this aspect, I think it's very good that this is has been a top topic for many. I mean, even Barack Obama had his AI council a few years, and the EU are making a big point of it, and everyone in every AI conference you go to discuss these topics. So obviously we are aware of the problems, and we just need to find a way to maneuver around here and make this a technology that is for the good of all instead of for the benefit of a few. And I think for one thing that is positive that we're actually talking about it as early on as we're doing.
Alexander, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, sure. And I think there are a lot of challenges, and I think the kind of AI divide will continue to grow. But I think there's also a lot of positives, and I've been attending conferences, not on the research side, but more on the business side of automation AI for 5 years, and I think it's been quite a dramatic change in maturity of what companies and organizations do. And that might be primarily larger organizations that have really started to invest more and tackle this in a more mature way since the last couple of years, obviously pushed by the overall hype in the society. But also there are so many things that you could do with AI and data that is not kind of boxed in by privacy concerns. Maybe not if you're in the B2C business, but if you are in B2B, or if you work with industrial applications, and if you work with enterprise type of solutions, I think there's a lot of untapped potential. We can do a lot of business value with AI. But a common thing that most organizations can improve in is how they manage this type of questions internally. And I believe many companies are going wrong. They might be treating this too much as a technology question or IT question or maybe a research type of question, but this is a business transformation. And the companies and organizations, private sector or public sector, need to treat this as a business transformation and apply, normal logic on how to drive business transformation. Not believe that this is just something that will happen by itself by hiring a data scientist or hiring a bunch of people reporting 5 layers down in some IT organization. Then nothing will happen. This needs to start from the top, but you need to get the organization with you. And you need to, balance business benefits and objectives with adding the right transformation competence, the right business SME type of competence, so that you work with the right use cases. and continuously identify new use cases, and you need to have the right technical competences. You can build and maintain all these solutions in a good way. So it's a much broader question than only, you know, the technical and data and platform and infrastructure type of questions that maybe some organizations tend to, you know, focus on. So yeah, it's important, and it's a C-suite type of question that needs to be taken seriously if a company really wants to reap the benefits of these technologies.
And an extremely difficult question to maneuver around.
Yeah.
For many. Yeah.
I fully agree as well. I mean, it's more than just adding another programming language or another type of cloud computing service. It's really something that should change the whole business, as you say, Alexander. So yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, and absolutely. That is a very good point. And I think to your point earlier, Anders, about if you look at the companies that are big, what do they all share? Why have they succeeded? What have they done rightly? And one thing that they have done, they have all defined themselves as digital or data-driven or data-first type companies. And then whatever applicability of that insight they have pursued, that has been a secondary aspect. So Amazon is just, you know, this data-rich beast, and it can go anywhere because the digital market is a single market. Everybody who's online is online in the same space. And I think that mindset needs to be adopted regardless of what you want to do with your business. So if you want to be part of the business that sort of decreases the divide, and that is your contribution to the society as a fallout of your business provisioning or whatever, then I think that's fine. But I really think you need to think about the implications of there being a single market, which is digital, which is global, which has 10 billion potential customers, and we are, you know, reeling in everybody else. I mean, all these satellites that are being shot up to get everybody online will just, you know, create an even bigger market, and so the potential will be even greater. But if you think that you can be not fully embedded in that market, I think you're making a mistake, and that goes for public sector as well.
Yeah, and I can just add a small anecdote from Spotify Times as well, and they made a big business level transformation back in 2011 when they moved from being more desktop first oriented to becoming more mobile first oriented. And this is not, you know, just a thing where you add a couple of mobile apps and add it to the company. It's really changing everything in the organization. It's changing how the whole business model itself, you know, what you really make money from. It changes how the organization is organized, you know, what type of groups you have. It changed how you could have licenses from record labels and whatnot. And of course, it changed the technology as well. But it was a complete business level transformation that happened. And Google did the same. You know, they went out in 2016 and said, you know, they went from being mobile first to becoming AI first in 2016, and that once again changed the whole organization. It changed, you know, what is the business model they have, you know, how do they work with data throughout the different products and services that they do have, how do you organize the whole organization, and you need to think about these things in a more holistic setting to truly be able to make a successful change and use of this. So yeah, I fully agree.
Definitely. Moving on to the next question now then. So this is Matthias's question. So data scarcity in a data abundant world. How do we cope with the fact that much of the data we have and could use for AI research is not possible to use due to privacy considerations, quality, or even legal aspects? Is the solution synthetic data? So Matthias, if you'd like to give a bit of background behind this question, and then I'll let everyone jump in.
Yeah, I mean, we've already touched upon this in the previous discussion. I mean, there's no lack of data today, and most organizations have tons of data, but the data may not be the right data. Obviously, it may not be of the right quality, but that is nothing new. That is, you know, quality issues with data is something that has been around for forever. But I think this is interesting from a you know, from a broader perspective, because as you, Patrick, said, I mean, maybe it's not a coincidence that these countries like the US and China are so successful in this field, because they are not so particular about how they use people's data. I know there are things that you can do in terms of applications that would be out of the question here, for instance, in this part of the world. So there may be, you know, we may have the data. I mean, as a telco, if a telco with the wrong intentions would like to use, you know, our subscribers' data, we have that. We can see, you know, we could use conversations, and we can use a lot of traffic data, but we don't do that. Obviously, it's first of all, it's ethically not, you know, acceptable, and secondly, it's not legal. But getting the right data for the right research purposes of the product development things is, I think, is a problem today, and is going to be a bigger problem, because I mean, we need to find a way to collect data and use that data transparently with the end user's consent, first of all. And how do we do that without blurring the way we treat consumers' data otherwise? It's a thin line to tread, right? Because without data, and I mean, if we talk about machine learning and specifically deep learning, without the data that is suitable for what we want to do, we cannot go anywhere unless we go with these big companies. So I think it's an emerging problem, and I think it's something we need to consider when we talk about privacy and regulation on a EU level. And again, I just want to stress that I'm a fan of you know, human rights and personal integrity and all that. I think we need that. We should not be able to use whatever data we may have for purposes it was not collected for. I'm totally behind that. But to get to the you know possible solutions that I've come across over the past years that I find quite interesting is one is then synthetic data. And the other one is, you know, crowdsourcing the data, where you collect data openly, like the Mozilla did a project, or still has a project, where you can actually donate your data for a very specific EU AI research purpose. You know, so just want to get the question out there. Do you have any, what's your view on this? What's your, experience with any of these kinds of solutions? But before I let the word loose, one obvious problem with both of these approaches is if let's say you crowdsource data, there is a high risk that this data will be biased or nuanced, because how will you get the right distribution of data or users, because there may be a certain group of people who are more inclined to donating data of a certain kind, for instance. And it's a sort of a fictive situation where you donate this data, very different from, let's say, taking a phone recording from someone calling a customer service agent. And secondly, the synthetic data, how do you make sure that data is also representative and really resembles the data that you need to create your models that does what you want them to do? So I think this is an important topic if we want to keep the pace up in both in the academia, but also in the industry. And I'm starting to view this as a potential problem, to be honest.
Patrick, did you have something to say?
Yeah, well, I think this is a great topic, and I think you touch on a number of different things that are super relevant for this conversation. One thing that you're right. I mean, it's interesting with the cold data records from cell companies, because they have always been very good at collecting very detailed records, and then that data has always been not allowed to use for market or anti-churn modeling or something like that, right? But they've been keeping the records so that authorities can make use of them if there is a need for it and stuff like that. But that then relates also to these backdoors of the devices that governments want to have and all of this. So once you have data, once you have a digital replica of part of yourself or your life or your network, then challenging questions arise. And I certainly do not have any solution to this. I have a number of concerns. But what I was curious to hear about, I remember, or I seem to recall a couple of years ago, there was talk about a new technique for encrypting data in a way that made it impossible to decrypt, but possible to manipulate. And I think IBM was involved in this, and they called it lattice cryptography. I don't know if anything came out of it, but again, I mean, that could be one avenue, right? If you can scramble the data in a way that makes it possible to identify certain aspects, but you can still use it for in some way. Don't ask me how. The techie guy up there in front of Hal needs to answer this. But I think that could be one way to go, right? If we think about it in terms of encryption and prevention of misuse, while at the same time making possible research into new ways of continuing progressing.
Yeah, I can just Mattias, do you want to?
No, I mean, obviously this is a problem with data that contains or could contain any personal information. Mainly, of course, if you're just looking at data that has nothing to do with any individuals, that's a totally different topic. But here, when we touch upon the privacy aspects and those things, and a lot of the data that is really interesting, especially if you work with language understanding, is actually something that comes from humans. So it may often contain a lot of stuff that is required or regarded as personal information. So that kind of data is often very sensitive. So Anders.
Yeah, you open up a lot of questions there and good comments, but to just start with some of your comments, Patrick, and some of the techniques, I love when we perhaps not try to just add regulation or forbid use of certain techniques for safety reasons, but actually try to use technology to make it safe. And that is what I think you mentioned here with lattice encryption, or rather the kind of homomorphic encryption, for example, which basically allows you to encrypt the data and then train the models on the cipher, the output from the encryption.
Right.
It sounds great, but in practice actually still doesn't work very well. It's like 1,000 times slower than normal type of learning algorithms, but the idea is great. However, in practice, it doesn't really work that well yet. But there are a lot of other techniques that you can use, like federated learning is coming along very nicely these days, and the whole idea of decentralized training that you can do to not move the data around, but rather move the models around, and in that way never share the data but still be able to learn models is a typical and great example of how you use techniques to safeguard privacy instead of simply forbid it. And I think this is a very good and important way to go forward. I also think another problem is that we need to, for one, recognize what the situation is today in the world. And especially with all the consumer-facing companies that we have, the big tech giants especially, but also a lot of others, they can simply put up a big terms of service agreement that you have to click and no one reads, and then they can use it for whatever they want, and they get around this kind of regulation. So, I mean, the regulation doesn't work. I mean,
well, you give them your consent because that's the only way to use their service.
Exactly.
Right? So,
otherwise, you have to not use it. So, obviously, it's so absurd situation today, and I, for me, it's very strange that not more people think this is absurd and don't do anything more about it. It's a weird situation that we have today.
It is a super weird situation, and that reminds me of. I remember ages ago when there was no alternative to commercial TV, so there wasn't really a big pay-per-view type situation out there. But today, you can subscribe to Netflix, for instance, and there won't be any sort of advertising breaks disturbing the film. I mean, they will certainly put products in the movies, and you're being exposed and manipulated all kinds of ways. But at least that interesting, you pay to not have that blatant in your face. That could be one way, again, Alexander, to transform the business, right? You go from a commercial ad revenue based business model to something else. And of course, that something else needs to be, you need to figure out a way to price it so that people, so that it makes sense for everybody. But I do think that we need to think about it much broader than the specific perhaps problem that we're dealing with, because you're absolutely right. I also think that crowdsourcing is a great way, but as you say, you know, crowdsourcing and you know, how you fill out surveys and stuff like that come with their own set of problems. But if you could work the transparency angle so people could more easily understand what you are sharing, I would love to be able to just call up Google and say, hey Google, you know, what do you know about me? You know, give me everything and present it to me so I can consume it, so I understand, and I will get back to you what I'm comfortable with and not. And that ease of interaction, inviting the user and democratizing, you know, participation is lacking. And I think that could be one way of circumventing the terms of service hack that the big companies use.
I mean, I think this is important because I mean, in the 90s when at KTH, you know, in collaboration with many other universities, when we created one of the first speech databases for creating, you know, research speech recognition engines or models, people went around all over the country with a microphone and a recorder and say, you know, give me a couple of audio samples, read from this book or whatever. It was very, very apparent and transparent what this data was and what they were doing and what it was going to be used for. Today, we have tons of that data. We're just drowning in that data. If you know, if someone would start recording, right? But it's not collected for that purpose. And since we should be very concerned about privacy. We should not use data without, you know, individuals' consent. But we're also very scared if we do things wrong, we may end up with huge fines and bad press, etc. So because we are scared, and when I say we, I'm speaking generally, of course, it's easier to say, no, don't touch the data, don't do anything. So we need to figure out ways to work with data, to collect it for the right purposes, and to do this transparently, so we just don't halt our sort of ambitions. And I think that is it's something that it's important to discuss, and it's important to sort of get your hands around this, I believe. Yeah.
Alexander, did you have something to add to that?
No, but I agree with what everybody has been saying. It's a tricky question, right? And privacy and the consumer applications and the AI is not going hand in hand unless you kind of own the platform and can set your own rules. But then most organizations and most people can't do anything about it, you know, despite, you know, saying I'm not going to be on Facebook anymore. But what I think, we in Sweden, we don't really own any of these platforms or have any companies, many at least. But we could probably focus on things that we are good at. When we are world leaders in telecom AI research, right? Together with China, and we could probably be world leaders in many other industrial application areas of AI, where we are strong in industry. If we in the industry focus on you know, creating the right business solution, where privacy might be a little bit of a less of a concern. So I'm thinking maybe we could put some additional focus on the areas where we could really be a strong contender in the market, and that is probably not in advertising, and that is probably not in search, but there might be in other areas. So I think that's my 2 cents on this question.
And also, I think to Matthias's point about the potential of getting access to quality data, it's so great, right? You can do so many fantastic things if you just know what you're doing and have access to technology and data. So I think we need to find a way of encapsulating that in some sort of secure, you know, morally decent way. For instance, there's huge potential of getting access to more personal and individual patient data records and other lifestyle factors for ensuring that you as a patient get the correct treatment. And this is, of course, a super tricky area to handle online or digitally, but the potential is great, because if you could access top-notch research relevant to you, your specific genome, your specific way of handling Friday nights and whatever, then there is so much potential. So I think we need to work the reward risk angle a little bit, and not be afraid to use the test bed mentality. And I certainly think, I mean, I'm not a very nation oriented person, but Sweden has some unique features in our numbers and in our culture that makes Sweden a perfect test bed for a bunch of stuff. We're only 10 million people, and we're pretty similar. I mean, we could easily get along across the regions for healthcare and stuff like that, but we don't, because we don't really think about it in terms of risk and reward and potential. And we certainly don't want to screw up. I mean, 1177 thing, we go like, let's not do that again.
No.
But, anyway,
I totally agree. There's so much there, so we need to find some way forward here, and just not stop in our tracks because we're afraid to do something wrong. So Charlotte, maybe.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if anyone had anything else to sort of add to that just before we move on to the next question. If not, I'll move on to Alexander's question. So Alexander's question, or subtopic should I say, is topic would be organizational and operating models enabling AI at scale. So Alexander, if you'd like to give a little bit of background behind your question, and then I'll let everyone else jump in as well.
No, I think this question is quite important. I tend to think, and maybe it's just because I have the transformation background, that most of the discussions around this topic are either philosophical or technical. While my true belief is that this is a management problem, and it's a business problem, and in order to tackle something, then you need to set the right model on how you want to operate as an organization. If you are not Google and you are not Facebook, you're a normal, maybe Nordic organization that has some data, that has some business problem, that have people that might not be AI researchers, but you still want to get business value out of AI and automation and related technologies. So how do you drive that transformation? How do you organize yourself? How do you create enough kind of business ownership with the people that owns the P&L, for instance, while still having sufficient scale in building competence and making the right technology choices and investing sufficiently in things like data and infrastructure and data management and data platforms. How much should you centralize versus how much should you decentralize, and what kind of decisions should be taken at what level in the organization, and who should you empower to drive this transformation? How do you empower that person or that team to drive this transformation? I think these are very, very important questions that every organization can and should think about, no matter how big or how relatively small they are, or how kind of tech savvy they are. Maybe they are in like my old organization Ericsson, where everybody could potentially wanted to do AI, right? Because that was hot and everybody was an engineer. Or if you're a public organization where you have no engineers at all in your organization, and you deliver some totally different type of services to the society. That's the question I wanted to discuss here and get your point of view on. And I have my point of view, but it's probably different depending on what organization you are.
I'm not going to attempt to answer how you do it. I just want to shed some more or share some thoughts around it, because I think one of the reasons why this is hard is that it is not evident from start what you will actually gain, what will be the results of, let's say, your first research projects. So you will have to spend a lot of money into something that you really don't know what will happen. You don't know the benefits. Don't know what cost reductions you will actually achieve, or what efficiency improvements you will achieve. So I think this is something that may run the risk of you know, ending up on the let's say the business case graveyard, so to speak. So daring to take these first leaps, I think, is one of the reasons why it's hard to operationalize and you know, get this as part of your DNA or your strategy. At least from some of the things that I've seen, and I think I have a hypothesis. Sometimes I get the impression that public sector, you know, has come, you know, in a way, is leading, at least in some aspects of AI, you know, at least trial and errors or deployment compared to portions, at least, of the private sector. And maybe this is because of the same reasons. You don't have that, you know, if I invest 1 million, what do I get in return? You don't have that same logic of you know, operations in public sector as you have in private sector. This is just you know, I don't have very much to back this up with, but I see a lot of very, very interesting and very forward-looking research and you know, initiatives that goes on in public sector, whereas in private sector it seems to be that some cases the barriers are too high to even get going. So just a few thoughts on your topic, Alexander. I don't have any answer to how you solve it.
I can just continue your line of discussion there, Matthias, a bit. And we worked at Peltarion with both public sector and private sector quite a lot. And I can subscribe to some of your ideas there, that some of the public sector organizations are surprisingly innovative when it comes to data and AI. And just to shout out some names, like the tax authority, Skatteverket, is surprisingly fast in actually deploying and making use of AI models today. And also Arbetsförmedlingen, the employment agencies, are actually surprisingly good. But there are also a lot of bad examples. So, and I think there are some good examples in the private sector as well. But I think one concern that a lot of private sector companies have is the short-termness, so to speak, the just looking at the next sprint of the development plan or the next quarterly report that they have to be positive in some way, instead of the more long-termness. That's certainly something that I fought a lot with when working at Spotify and trying to set up a research team that did not look, 3 months ahead, but rather 3 years or 5+ years ahead. And that's actually not an easy thing to do, I think, in a lot of organizations. Whereas the big tech giants are doing that all the time. So I think this is something that I wish more companies could start to think about when it comes to that. When it comes more to what you said, Alexander, as well, about how to do, find an operational enablement of AI. We usually speak about 2 different ways to go about doing this. And you spoke about the top-down approach, which trying to get the management teams on board and making sure that they are really invested in doing this. And that certainly is very important. You can also speak about the bottom-up approach, which is more or less that each team try to innovate themselves and then having them innovate and coming up, or you can have a central data science team somewhere, and then they by themselves try to innovate. And all of these have the pros and cons. And the best, of course, is have some kind of hybrid approach here. But to get some company to start, I still think it's good to find some few selected use cases to start with. They will probably fail, and they will probably not fail because the approach didn't work, but because they didn't have the business organization in place. They didn't have the infrastructure in place. They didn't have the right mindset and understanding and the support from the management team in place. But that will still start moving in that direction. So it will come, hopefully, a point later when each team and each domain expert, rather than the data expert or data scientist, can, so the domain expert, if it's that in manufacturing department or the finance department or the product department or in the sales department or whatnot, when, the time when those teams can themselves start to innovate and experiment with data and AI, that is truly when the company will start to scale. And that is, what I think, Google said, when they think about, becoming an AI first organization, where, data and AI is a natural part of every product and services that they have throughout the company. So just having that understanding and the goal to, at one point in the future, it will take some time, but if you have that goal in place, I think that will be a good measure of success, at least.
Yeah, I think what you need is I mean, Andrew Ng talks about the ability to do both technical due diligence of AI projects, but also the sort of the business side of it, the business due diligence, or I think they are equally important. And for this to work, you need to have the technical know-how, obviously, to be able to do technical due diligence. Is this a problem that we saw with these algorithms? But you also need this. You also need these business translators, or whatever you want to call them, that can actually identify what problems you can actually solve using various AI technologies. And I think that is, that is one of the hard parts, because it's not just throw a ton of data onto a problem and then you have this AI, solution. I don't think so many people believe that today, although, but I mean, you need to identify what opportunities do you actually have and what are suitable for this and what are not. And those business translators, I think, are a key resource if you want to do this transformation, or if you want to sort of operationalize the use of AI in your organization. And I don't think they are not too many out there, unfortunately.
No, I couldn't agree more. And with my experience, where we were able to scale quite fast was really because we could show the business value. And in that case, we were investing at least 1/3 of the whole total investment in the pure AI automation, meeting business, the business transformation side, understanding the business side, working with the stakeholders and the executives to articulate the business problem and showing the business value of the different solutions, and getting everybody around you with you to remove some of the roadblocks. And that, I think that is probably quite easy to forget, that part of the investment. Maybe you need to add 50% on the bill for the data platform and the data scientist team to be able to have them really functional.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you need to be allowed to fail, and fail with pride, right?
Yes.
And you need to have that level of autonomy or authority, or whatever you want to call it, and that of course requires buy-in from senior management. Otherwise, I don't think it's the senior management who should, maybe necessarily in the beginning formulate the AI agenda. So in that case, the top-down approach, where you say, this is our AI agenda or AI strategy, let's go, execute. I think this needs to be a collaboration, but you definitely need the buy-in, because eventually you will need a budget, and you will need to make sure you don't lose your job if you fail. I don't think that would happen in Sweden or in our part of the world, but failing is a great thing in this sense, I believe. Yeah,
agreed.
Patrick, did you have something to add to that before we move on to the next question?
Well, I think what Anders raised about the time horizon is very important. I think in order for transformation to run its course, I think you need to have a vision of the future and your place in it. And I think in our times, people are quite reluctant to say, well, in 5 years, the world's going to look like this. So therefore, people are reluctant to set up 5-year research projects, although that may be the thing to do. So I really think that what successful business transformation is all about is understanding the trends that impact you and your business and the company, and how to then, as Gretzky said, skate to where the puck is going to be, and when you're ready to receive it. So really, it has very little to do with actual nitty-gritty AI projects, and you don't need to stand up a lot of POCs. There are a tremendous amount of use cases proven out that are just there. Your competition may use it already. Companies that are not relevant for your in terms of direct competition may still have stuff that you can benefit and learn from if you just look around you.
Yeah.
So I think the greater perspective on where the market is heading and your place in it will give you the confidence that you need to then allow, you know, agility and transparency across the company, which needs to be there for open culture to allow, you know, innovation to occur wherever it occurs. It may be forced through the paying of clever guys to come in and tell you what to do, or it can come from just being bold enough to listen to what somebody on the shop floor says about, you know, if we just tweak this thing this way, it would be better for this reason, and then go for it. So I really think it's you need the vision and you need the confidence that your vision is correct, and then act on that. And then, as you said, Matthias, you know, if it's wrong, hey, okay, you screwed up. Next, try.
I have a question to you, Alexander. I mean, you with your background in you know, transformation work, do you see is this type of you know, transformation that in some way involves automation and AI and the use of that in or organizations? What, you know, is there a big difference, you know, here as you know, compared to other kinds of transformation initiatives and efforts? I mean, we can talk about digitalization as a transformation, huge transformation effort, right? That everyone is going through or going through, right? And this is just a part of it. But do you see specific issues or problems with when we talk about AI and automation in terms of transformation agendas or projects?
No, I get a bit of a feeling that maybe this was to some extent overhyped for a while. It basically went from nothing to a lot of hype, with a lot of, as you said, a lot of proof of concepts, maybe with a lot of failed proof of concepts, and maybe in some some organizations that was it. Then you say, we tried it didn't work. While maybe in the beginning you might need to do 10 proof of concepts to have 2 successful use cases, and those 2 might be the ones that, you know, really gives you the fuel to kick it off. When I was in management consulting, I think there wasn't much talk about this kind of topics some 10 years ago, but now when I'm at the kind of software side working with business partners, then we see that obviously every consultancy in the world is having some kind of offering around this topic. So of course something has changed, and I think companies are investing a lot more now than what they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but probably a lot of companies have a long way to go. But I've also had the luxury of working with India for many years, and there we see an fantastic amount of competence coming out of the universities and also all the services companies that exist in India. So I think a lot of Swedish organizations could benefit a lot by, you know, broadening their horizons and looking at some of these topics in a little bit more global perspective, as we know that competence might not be abundant here in the Nordics. I don't know if it was a good answer to your question, Matthias, but yeah, well, reflections on what I've seen from my
yeah. Obviously, there's something going on here. I mean, if we think about transformation and you know, knowing that we need to move from point A to point B, and often we know what steps are needed to you know, we need to take to get there. We need to change our billing systems. We need to go more digital in terms of how we handle, you know, customer interactions, or how we handle our, you know, documentation internally. There's so many things where there's, you know, a few options to choose from. When we talk about AI, I think many struggle with, you know, what are we going to do with this apart from specific applications? So when we talk about transformation and AI, what is it going to do for us? And I think that is one of the problems why transformation and keeping, you know, having AI as part of a, you know, core transformation of companies is difficult, because it's the ultimate goal or outcome is unclear when we start out in some way.
And maybe most organizations will not totally revamp their purpose and their whole business model, like you talked about, Anders, with Spotify and Google. Maybe for most companies, AI and automation could be about just getting a better customer experience and getting more operational efficiency while still doing the same thing towards the same types of customers.
I think that's
totally agree. Yeah.
That's one common misconception, I think, about the differences between traditional software engineering and AI engineering, if you call it that. And one of the obvious differences, of course, is that AI is very much dependent on the data that is being used, whereas traditional software engineering is more dependent on the code, and it's easier to plan that I want to build this mobile app or backend system or web frontend or whatever it is. Whereas you cannot really say if a certain AI system will work until you tried it on the specific data that you're going to use. So that adds a completely different level of lack of knowledge that you have to be much more exploratory. You have to be experimenting much more. You have to do the failing fast, and doing what you said, Alexander, with try 10 different things, not one. And probably most will fail, but the one that do succeed will probably be really good. So being able to recognize once again what the difference is between traditional software engineering and AI, which is, for one, the dependency to data, which is much higher, and also that the tooling maturity is so much lower when it comes to AI compared to traditional software engineering. So that will cause problems, and that will cause a lot of POCs to end up in a prototype graveyard. And I think it's an important fact to try to share across, that people understand and plan for.
One question to you, Anders, as you coming from a company that was providing a AI platform that is kind of democratizing AI, and there are a couple of companies doing similar things where you say that what should I call it, business citizen developers could emerge from normal business SMEs, and if we just make the tooling much easier, basically everybody could create their own AI models. How quickly should an organization move in that direction, since that could also kind of a little bit bring a lot of chaos, you can say. Maybe different things being done, the same thing being done at many places, quickly uncoordinated, while not connecting the big picture. So, and that is like the decentralization versus centralization question. If you have a certain amount of money in an organization to invest in this, how much?
You're opening a bit Pandora's box here, and I think we don't have that much time, but I can give a quick answer at least. And I think one of the most common mistakes that a lot of companies do is that they try to build everything from scratch. They think just because they see the model is out on GitHub, you can download the latest BlenderBot 2.0, and why not simply put it in production? What could the problem possibly be? Then people haven't really understood how the code quality of these kind of research level repositories is so low, so it's not suitable at all to put in production in any way, and you will have a huge problem in trying to maintain them over time. And the level or the time necessary to do experimentation on your own data will be so slow, so you will not get any progress at all, unless you have the big research team, unless you have the huge competence and knowledge in-house, which most companies don't. So I think this is a big misconception that I hope and I wish more companies understood. That just because you can see there is some data set out there on Kaggle, or there is this model deployed on Hugging Face, or there is this code available in GitHub, that doesn't mean you can put it in production and find value from it. There is so much more necessary to make that happen. And that, misunderstanding and misconception, I think it's the most common question we got. We can see, it's out on GitHub. Why can't we simply use it ourselves? Well, we say, try it, see how well it works. You will fail. And this, this is a classical problem of immaturity of tooling that people don't understand. And the tooling that we have today, it's made by tech giants for tech giants. It's made by Google, by Facebook, by Alibaba, for Google, for Facebook, for Alibaba. It's not made for normal companies that don't have the same, research groups, infrastructure, data, and knowledge that they do have, and computing power that they do have. Yeah, okay. I will try to stop there, even though I could continue for half an hour more if you want to.
We did the same, right? We had to, enable democratization while still limiting democratization or making it controlled democratization. Yeah. You could say it's an interesting challenge, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's definitely something, like you say, that you could continue talking about forever, but unfortunately we don't have forever to talk about it. So yeah, we'll definitely move on to sort of the last question now. So this is Patrick's question. So what is operational AI and how does it differ from traditional research in AI? So Patrick, if you want to just give a little bit of an explanation as to why you think this question is important.
Well, I think Anders just answered that beautifully, and that's it, right? So what is so fascinating with research is that some of the results that come out of research are so seductive. They are so fascinating. It's amazing what's coming out of research, right? But that does not mean that is what the target state that you should be shooting for if you're anybody, really. I mean, if you're a mid-sized Swedish company, and all of a sudden, something amazing is available thanks to a giant beast of GPT-3 type, parameters, then that means nothing for you. Although theoretically, certain breakthroughs certainly point towards the future where we can see we will be heading. So I really think that mature distinction between the implications of peer-reviewed, replicated, proven out the theory and science, that is a different thing than your operational use of certain techniques or technologies that will benefit your specific business. So I don't think we shouldn't discount the value of going about this a bit gently and carefully and relying on hardened out solutions, platforms, applications, services coming from a place outside of the company. So I think you should certainly keep an eye on where research is heading, especially if you want to try and establish that vision a couple of years out that you want to build your strategy around. But I don't think it translates, like Anders points out, it doesn't translate into operational efficacy for you necessarily. I think we see this is sort of a general truism when it comes to how research relates to operational value. I mean, I love the space program. I love we're going to space. I'm not very interested in what Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos are doing, suborbital or whatever. But I think what NASA has been doing forever and what Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX is amazing. And the research fueling those possibilities are great. But it doesn't mean that we can easily see the here and now value of spending all that money on those types of projects. So they are not for everybody. And I think we need to be okay with that and just say, okay, well, what is a good idea for us in regards to making use of this promising field of AI? And I think then you're in your field, right, Alexander? Then you look at what's the business, what's the market dynamics, what are the sub-optimized potential benefits of changing things changing the way we're doing, and maybe some of those changes will be fueled by judicial use of AI. Great. But it may also be fueled by AI research breakthroughs that are 30 years old.
No, exactly. And I think, operational improvements, fueled by AI will, of course, open the eye for a lot of people of the opportunities of AI and probably, further increase the will to invest and focus in research type of AI. Probably most people need to see the proof first before they really can, jump on the idea.
There's there's still a gap between research results and when you can go from there to practical implementations or applications of it. And I'm sure every time something goes out there, you know, GPT-3, you know, I get the question, well, why don't we just use that? Or from customers saying, well, we saw this, why, you know, why can't we do that? Of course you can, but it's not just about taking a piece of technology and put it into a system and then you're good to go. I mean, there's all of these other aspects that go with any normal engineering or product development or anything that needs to be in place for this to be actually useful. And also some of the things that you see out there, they are amazing. I mean, you all saw the Google Duplex thing a couple of years ago, right? Where, you know, you had this robot calling to book a hairdresser's appointment or book a table at a restaurant. They are fascinating, but we still, you know, well, in a way you can use Google Duplex right in the States for certain, you know, private issues maybe, but you know, understanding what it is that is actually shown, and why is this scenario a robot calling the hairdressers and not the other way around? Because the other way around would be much more difficult. And if you don't understand the data that goes into a specific result, then you see that, well, you see that the problem is very similar to ours, but the data may be so different. So our problem is still unsolved, although it's similar. So there's so much in there that you need to sort of, you know, dig a bit deeper into to understand how far away is this from a practical, you know, application and implementation. So I would say that there's still a several years gap, you know, between the you know, sort of sci-fi stuff that you see and say, well, hey, the future is here, and then when you can actually start using them in practice. So we're sort of running also the risk, again, back to, you know, operationalization and transformation, running the risk of being blinded by or not seeing the woods for the trees or whatever it's, you know, how you translate that. So as with any new technology, right?
I mean, well said, and I can sympathize a lot with what you say, Matthias, about GPT-3. I think it's the most annoying question I get. You know, why can't we simply use GPT-3? And people don't understand how horribly bad it is compared to other models that's so much better and so much more practical. And yeah, it's very annoying.
It's going to be very interesting to see this this Blender bot and to see what you know, yeah, what dust that will stir up. It's going to be going to be something. Yeah.
Because that actually is more practical. You can actually run it on a single GPU.
Yeah.
But anyway, you know, I think once again, if we try to understand a bit about how the situation looks like in the world today, I think for one, we should be rather grateful that so many of these tech giants, not all of them, I shouldn't name names, but we have some good examples of tech giants that do share code, that do share models, that do share the data. And you can think about, you know, why did they do that? And they could simply be nice. And they could also simply be saying, you know, if we share it, we can get people to help doing research on this, and that will benefit us in the end. And that's probably what they think. And but still, you know, why are they not afraid about the competitor, you know, getting access to that? And I think the answer is very simple. And if you take the article that Google published in 2015, called Hidden Technical Depth of Machine Learning, that they basically said themselves that the actual model itself and the data is like 5% of the whole system that you need to actually operationalize it, to put it in production. 95% is just the supporting system and it's around it. And they don't share that. You have to try to build it yourself. You will fail doing that most of the time. So obviously they're super grateful that if they share the data in the model and other people try to simply find some small improvements for that, they could also take benefit of that. But they still know that they can't build all the 95% supporting system around it. So they're happy to do so. I think, you know, if we just try to end with a nice quote, this is from Jeremy Howard. He was previously president of Kaggle and now the founder of Fast AI, who, for one, publish courses and also libraries for making the latest type of deep learning more accessible. He was asked by Lex Friedman on some podcast, you know, what do you think about research in deep learning? And he said, I think most research in deep learning is a complete waste of time. And what he meant with that, if I were to try to understand it, is that, you know, most of the research deep learning is about trying to find a 0.1% higher accuracy for some academic data set that is so different from a real industrial real world data sets and a situation that you otherwise have, that it doesn't really benefit for normal real world use cases. What you should focus on instead is questions about, how can you, as a company that don't have the big infrastructure, really make use of this, which is other techniques like active learning or federated learning or self-supervised learning or semi-supervised learning, and these type of techniques that minimize the need to have annotated data, which normal companies don't, and you can't use academic data sets, you have to use real data. If you start focusing on those type of techniques and that type of research question, that would be really beneficial. And I think he's very right in that aspect. But still, I think we should be grateful, but not too naive on why tech giants do share some part of their work. They know, of course, that you can't simply put it in production just by having it. But they're very thankful that a lot of other people try to benefit a bit.
But again, I mean, to speak in favor for many of them, if we compare how it is today, if you want to try to create something and build something, it's so much easier to do that today than 5 years ago, where you had to go and buy your own GPUs, and So I mean, they're some of them are at least trying. If they have a hidden agenda, I won't speculate about that, but at least trying to help out in getting this technology out and operationalized, and maybe even democratize it in some way. So there's the positive angle to it as well.
If it didn't sound like that, I'm sorry. I certainly am the first one to really be amazed by all the amazing progress that we have seen in recent years, and I'm saying just the recent 3-4 years in how we can not only scale up to larger and larger models, but actually start to work with models that are also practical use more and more, and how we start to focus on problems that really make AI accessible for more companies, and start to focus on ethical questions and techniques that makes it possible to preserve privacy while still being taking advantage of these techniques. So it's certainly happening a lot. And I think the potential, I think today we have more than enough technique for most companies to start making use of AI today. That's not the problem. So the problem is more on having this kind of a holistic mindset that we have said here, and we need to make people understand what the proper use of AI is and how you do that.
No, definitely. I think that's a really good point to sort of to end on there. So I have to say thank you again to everyone for participating again. I'll just stop the recording there.